City Council Speaker Adrian Adams says this should have happened a long time ago, but the legislation
rightfully wraps justice into one package.
One of the far left's craziest ideas could soon become a reality in New York, and it really is quite something. New York advances some controversial race-related legislation, a Kamala Harris train wreck interview gets covered up by the media, and a TikToker claims that capitalism is just modern-day slavery. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely read it in tomorrow's show. And before we get into our main topics for today, just a quick word on the really disturbing news yesterday that there was another attempted assassination against former President Donald Trump. I just want to say that, look, this stuff is really scary, it's really alarming, and no matter where you land politically, what side of the aisle you're on, nobody should be wishing violence on anyone else, and we should never stoop to any sort of violence against the people that disagree with us. It's never okay, and it's not something to laugh about or to meme about or support, and it's always disheartening to me to see how many people are inconsistent on that basic moral principle when it's the other side at question. But of course, cling to it fiercely if their side comes under target. No. Common sense, good people across the board should all be able to agree that political violence has no place in our society, in our democratic, free society, and it's really shameful and awful stuff. I might cover more of the fallout on the show later this week, but I did just want to touch on it briefly because I know it will be top of mind for many of my viewers and listeners. And now we got to talk about New York City, where legislation advancing one of the radical left's most controversial ideas, the idea of forcing taxpayers to pay reparations for slavery all these years later, is actually advancing because a new bill was just passed, putting forward the idea for further study and potential implementation. Let's take a listen to some local news coverage.
New tonight, New York City had one of the highest rates of slave ownership in the country in the 1700s.
That's according to the City Council, which just took a significant step toward healing and reconciliation. Jenna DeAngelis explains from City Hall.
I want reparations in my lifetime.
This 94-year-old Crown Heights resident is joining the fight for justice and equity on the steps of City Hall.
It means everything.
Ahead of a vote Thursday, City Council members outlined a package of legislation aimed at acknowledging, studying, and addressing the impact of slavery and racial injustices in New York City.
In this surrounding area, people of African descent were brought to these shores and sold and trafficked and worked to build this city that we so love.
One of 4 bills establishes a task force to consider the creation of freedom trails in the city. Another would require the installation of signage near Wall and Pearl Streets to mark the site of New York's first slave market.
The harm slavery caused Black Americans continues to be felt today.
Establishing the ongoing legacies of slavery in the city is part of the bill Councilmember Crystal Hudson introduced, which calls for a truth, healing, and reconciliation process. It would also protect and acknowledge those affected and recommend changes to prevent the recurrence of injustices. Councilmember Farrah Lewis's bill mandates a study on reparations, both monetary and non-monetary, responding to pushback.
Financial restitutions is not what we're doing right here with reparations is about. It's about having a conversation, putting together a committee. They should trust the process.
City Council Speaker Adrian Adams says this should have happened a long time ago, but the legislation
rightfully wraps justice into one package.
A package which passed. The bills now head to the mayor's desk, which the council members involved say they hope and anticipate he will sign.
So there's a lot to unpack with this story, but first I want to say that a couple of the things in this package actually do make sense to me and sound like something I would support. Because I do think that slavery is obviously a great evil and is actually the stain on America's history that takes the shine off the fact that we are, in many ways, one of the most miraculous nations and civilizations to ever exist. But slavery is, the black eye to that. And it's a horrific thing that I think needs to be remembered and reckoned with. And I actually really like the idea of marking on the streets where the slave markets were, so people are aware of this and maintaining that history and that awareness. I went to Charleston, South Carolina not too long ago, and they have a beautiful city that is massively integrated, and in many ways this hub of multiculturalism that's really symbolic of everything that's beautiful about modern America. But they do have things pointed out when you do a tour. That's where the slave ships came in. This was the slave market. And I think it's important to not push that under the rug, to not pretend it never happened, to not bury your head in the sand, but actually talk about it. So some of the stuff in this package I really have no issue with. It's the reparations stuff, this idea of massive monetary redistribution, punishing people intergenerationally for things they never experienced, and punishing people who had nothing to do and never condoned with such behavior. That's where they totally lose me. That's where it becomes unfair, divisive, and frankly, slightly dystopian. One of the Republican members of the city council, Joseph Borelli, who represents Staten Island, made a similar criticism of the plan. He said, "I'll move before I pay, because if they can introduce me to one New Yorker who owned a slave, I'd be happy to consider it. But until then, I'm not paying a dime as a reparation for a harm I did not cause, nor condone, nor once participated in." He added, "I bear no responsibility for slavery, unless someone could explain to me why I should bear some individual and societal guilt through my taxes, I'm going to be opposed." And that's really the fundamental problem I have with the reparations movement and the very premise of it. I, of course, actually do agree that in the immediate aftermath of slavery, actual slaves should have been given reparations for the crimes that were done to them. And I think it's an injustice that never happened. But 200 of years later, tax and basically steal from people who have nothing to do with this, who never participated in this, who never condoned it once, who were never slave owners or anything of the sort, and many of whom who aren't even descended from slave owners, but we'll get into that in a minute because it all gets very complicated and messy very quick, to give to people, to redistribute to people who were never slaves, whose parents were never slaves, and whose grandparents in most cases were not slaves either, unless we're talking about a really old person whose grandparents were maybe hundreds of years ago. It's not even anywhere close to our lifetimes that any of this happened. And I do acknowledge that the economic ramifications still shape the world today. I absolutely do. But I just don't think you can ever engage in this kind of collective guilt and blame and collective reward of grouping people by skin color and punishing some for the others that just look like them or came before them, and then rewarding others for things that never happened to them. To me, that is just a total non-starter. It's just fundamentally unjust, and it would only divide the racial groups so much further and reinforce these categories among us rather than let them fade into the background of American life, which is what I think most Americans want. Most of us want to live in a world where race is looked at like eye color or hair color, not a particularly meaningful fact of life that divides us. But when you further accentuate these divides and you start taking from some people and giving to others on the base of their race, you reinforce those groups as meaningful and you fuel hostility and resentment, and understandably so. If I was a white New Yorker who maybe my parents moved here from Italy in like 1950 or whatever, and I'm being taxed and punished for things that I never did, not even my ancestors did, but even if my ancestors did do, that's not my fault. I'm having my resources confiscated to give to people who this didn't even happen to. I would absolutely be resentful of that. I would find that fundamentally unjust. And no, it would not promote racial harmony and tolerance. There's also so many practical problems with the idea of financial reparations, because what about all the people who are descended from both slaves and slave owners, right? I think Kamala Harris is actually simultaneously Black and descended from slave owners. Should someone like her pay reparations or get reparations or both? What about all the people who are white or who are Asian or some other group but are not descended from slave owners? They're all going to still be on the hook for taxes, right? What if their parents came here in the 20th century from Europe after slavery ended? What if somebody's descended from African people who participated in the slave trade and sold their own people to colonial settlers and to the transatlantic and participated in the transatlantic slave trade. Should they be forced to pay reparations? I mean, how granular are we going to get with some of this? And the expense that is involved in actual reparations that would be meaningful is truly astronomical. So some of the states that have looked at it have come back with analyses of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars is what it would take to truly compensate people. You're never going to raise that. I mean, it would just be insane to massively tax and confiscate resources from people to redistribute like this on the basis of race explicitly. Now, I say all of this and I point out all of these criticisms without denying the fact that generational wealth is a reality and that the legacy, I think more so of Jim Crow and other things like that and segregation than slavery, but the legacy of this is still with us today and does influence things like the racial wealth gap. I don't deny that at all. But what I do say is that the solution there is to expand opportunity to low-income and disadvantaged people of all races, which will disproportionately help African Americans and the descendants of slavery through things like school choice, through things like pro-opportunity, pro-growth policies that increase wages and jobs, through policies that make life more affordable, that make schools more affordable. All of these things we can and should focus on, but we should not try to restructure and recreate society along racial lines in this kind of dystopian and unfair way that a reparations policy would inevitably entail. I don't really think this will happen, or at least not anytime soon, although I will just point out that this study is going to cost New York City taxpayers $2.5 million, according to the Telegraph. So I guess we're just going to spend a couple millions of dollars on a study of an idea when we already know about the idea. We could just either move forward with it or not. I don't actually think it's going to happen in the immediate future, even in far left bubbles like New York City, because it is so extreme and the cost would be so astronomical. But the fact that we're moving in this trajectory, that this radical and insane, in my view, idea is gaining steam and is only moving in one direction in the left-wing bubbles of America is truly concerning stuff. If you're somebody who actually wants to see progress and justice in America, not more division and more injustice. That's my take on the whole reparations issue and what's unfolding in New York right now. But what do you think? Do let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear all of your perspectives, even if you disagree with me. And now we've got to talk about Kamala Harris, because the vice president and presidential candidate just gave another interview that was a bit of a train wreck. But she's kind of getting away with it because the media is deceptively editing her own interview in order to spare her blushes. So Kamala gave an interview to a local Philadelphia news station, and they sliced it up to make her answers look less incoherent and more on point than they actually were, essentially covering up the enormous word salad off-topic answers she originally gave. You have to see this to believe this, so I'm going to show you two videos. The first is the original video that aired in full on YouTube and a few other places like the news organization's website. It shows Kamala asked a clear question about reducing costs and going into a long diatribe about her personal history and lawns and her mother.
When we talk about bringing down prices and making life more affordable for people, what are one or two specific things you have in mind for that?
Well, I'll start with this. I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me. She worked very hard. She was able to finally save up enough money to buy our first house when I was a teenager. I grew up in a community of hardworking people, you know, construction workers and nurses and teachers. And I try to explain to some people who may not have had the same experience, you know, but a lot of people will relate to this. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood of and I was raised to believe that dignity, and that we as Americans have a character, and we have ambitions and aspirations, but not everyone necessarily has access to the So when I talk about building the economy, it is very much And creating opportunity for people, for example, to start a small business.
So she was asked for specific policy ideas to bring down high prices, and she started talking about her childhood, her mother, nice lawns, and the spirit of the American people. Now, after a few minutes of rambling, she did eventually get to a couple of policy ideas, which hilariously wouldn't really bring down prices, but we'll get into that in a second. Here's what they aired on TV, though, this local affiliate. Here's how they cut the interview and aired it on TV.
When we talk about bringing down prices and making life more affordable for people, what are one or two specific things you have in mind for that?
And creating opportunity for people, for example, to start a small business. So my opportunity economy plan includes giving startups a $50,000 tax deduction to start their small business. It used to be $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. Opportunity economy means, look, we don't have enough housing in America. We have a housing supply shortage. And what that means, in particular for so many younger Americans, the American dream is elusive. It's just actually not attainable. To help people who just want to get their foot in the door, literally. And so giving first-time home buyers a $25,000 down payment assistance. Another plan that I have that is a new approach is to expand the child tax credit to $6,000 for young families for the first year of their child's life.
Did you notice anything about the massive clip jump there? They skipped over her whole word salad and multi-minutes of rambling about lawns and her childhood and just cut right to her policies, which this is only the second interview she has done since becoming the Democratic nominee for president. And so people are concerned about her coherence and her word salad and her ability to actually articulate solutions. And instead of the media showing people her honest answers, how she actually responds to questions, they are slicing her up in the most favorable way possible to make her seem more on point and articulate than she actually is. That's not journalism. That's propaganda. I don't understand from a journalist perspective why you would ever do that unless you are taking your bidding directly from the campaign headquarters. It doesn't make sense to me. You should show the American people her actual response in full, or at least in chronological order, not deceptively edit it. I mean, maybe you have to cut it down, but you should not juxtapose things so they seem as if they were said one after another when they weren't. That's very dishonest and very misleading editing that's clearly being done to make her look better. And even then, it doesn't really work because the actual policies that she gets to, I mean, I guess the bar is on the absolute floor at this point. We should give her a little bit of credit for actually discussing policies several minutes after being asked to name policies. These policies have very little to do with lowering prices. Like a tax credit for starting a small business is all well and good. I think that's an interesting idea. I'm not opposed to that, but it has nothing to do with lowering prices that people pay at the pump or at the grocery store. It's just completely off topic. Same way the child tax credit has nothing to do with lowering prices. It's a whole separate, unrelated policy issue that might put money in people's pockets, although it also has to come from somewhere. It has to be taxed or redistributed away from other people's pockets, but it doesn't do anything to affect price levels, really. And some of the things she mentioned that actually would affect price levels are good, like, for example, talking about the need to expand the housing supply. She's right about that. We have a housing shortage and we need to cut red tape and regulations and build more housing. But ironically, one of the things she throws out there, her plan to give people assistance, taxpayer-funded assistance with down payments, would actually probably on net slightly increase housing prices, because what you're doing is subsidizing demand. You're not making it easier to build new housing. You're not doing anything to expand the supply. You're just increasing a subsidy to help people pay more, which we've seen with student loans and so many other things tends to get captured somewhat and just increase prices. When you inflate the demand arbitrarily and buyers know that now people can afford to pay more and there's still the same limited supply, they can raise prices to capture that. So it's a folly. It sounds good, it sounds nice, but ironically, it would probably have a small impact on increasing housing prices. And she's listing it as one of the things she'll do to decrease housing costs. That's kind of a hilarious own goal in a way. But the real story here is how this media outlet, this local media outlet, which was given the second interview that Kamala Harris has done as a presidential candidate as a major at the top of the ticket. First, CNN got an interview, and then this local Philadelphia or Pennsylvania-based outlet, which does make sense because it's a swing state. But I mean, they must have a very cozy or friendly relationship with Kamala HQ here to get this interview and then to be editing it and slicing it up so favorably for the vice president. Something tells me they would not do the same for Donald Trump if he were to go on a rambly word salad answer for multiple minutes and then eventually get to somewhat related, though not even really that related, policy points. They wouldn't cut out all the fluff and make him look sharp and on point when he isn't. At least I don't think they would, but maybe I'm just cynical and too much of a skeptic. You guys, let me know in the comments, because in my view, this kind of thing is why people increasingly do not trust traditional old school media. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app. Today, this wild TikTok claims that capitalism is just modern day slavery. Buckle up and get ready to lose some brain cells with me as we take a listen.
This is slavery. They just let us watch TV when we're done with our day's work. This is slavery. We just have the choice of Pizza Hut and Taco Bell and Burger King. This is slavery times 2. Not only do they make a majority of the money off of your labor, you go and spend your slavery bucks and they make double on the products that you buy. A car loan, a loan for your college education, a loan for your home. This is slavery, you guys. They got people slaving so hard they're developing mental health problems, and guess who gets the profit when those people seek help? Not us. It's slavery. It's slavery, but the white people are in the house. They're close to the massa. The rest of us are out in the field.
Oh?
And don't get it wrong, some of them come out of the house and go out into the fields, and some of them in the fields go into the house. Everyone's always banging so hard for capitalism, but it's just slavery, you guys. It's just slavery.
I'm usually really not one to even use this word or to bring up this point, but I feel like in this case, I just kind of have to. How is this not offensive to actual victims of slavery, which is still a practice in parts of the world and is such a horrifying and terrible thing? How is this not offensive and insulting to compare the life of a free working person in one of the most prosperous societies in human history to that of a slave who was brutalized and forced to labor in disgusting and horrific conditions and given no freedom and no liberty and had their rights violated in too many ways to count? How is that not like in a society that gets offended over jokes, how is unironically making those kinds of assertions and absurd comparisons not actually offensive? That's what I don't understand. The double standard here between policing jokes, but then people can actually say in seriousness, and no, I checked, this is not a parody account or a bot. This can be said in seriousness and it's somehow not considered worthy of offense. I would consider it profoundly offensive if I was the descendant of slaves, or if I had been a survivor of modern day slavery, to compare my plight or my ancestors' plight to that of the modern day laborer who works from home and eats Taco Bell. Like, babe, seriously? I mean, the whole thing is so unhinged. Capitalism and just working for a living is not in any way, shape, or form similar to slavery. Because by definition, slavery, you're not paid, you're not compensated, your labor is forced, and you don't get to choose where you work. You can't quit your job as a slave. You can't put in your 2 weeks notice as a slave, babe. It is absurd. It's such an offensive comparison, an outrageous comparison, because it's literally the antithesis of slavery, where you have free will and you can decide what to do, what kind of work, where to work. how to structure your life. All of this is up to you, and it's up to you to pave your way in life and shape your life for yourself. This is literally the opposite of slavery. And I mean, the idea that like, oh, well, now you use your slave bucks, which that's an oxymoron, babe. There is no money given to slaves. That's kind of the point, to just buy Taco Bell, and we're supposed to be happy with that. I think a lot of slaves would have loved to have some Taco Bell and to be able to watch TV. Like, the comparison here is so galling. The luxury, the relative luxury of modern day life, even for the poorest Americans, compared to the standard of living of even the rich people back then, let alone the actual slaves and the brutally victimized people back then. It's giving incredibly out of touch. And who is this they that this person keeps referring to? Well, they get to get rich because then you need mental health care and then you go see you mean that's just other people who are working, who own a business, or who are therapists or are counselors. Like, the they is all of us. We all make money and profit from the things that other people need, and we work in that field to provide that need. And I don't even understand what the alternative here is supposed to be compared to this apparently dystopian slave-like state where you're expected to pay for yourself as an adult, pay for your food, pay for your housing, pay for your own car. I mean, what? Is everything you need and want in life supposed to just be provided to you for free? Where's it going to come from? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to labor and toil to provide it for you for free? And wouldn't those people actually have to be slaves? Like, it doesn't make sense. And why are you so profoundly entitled, yet also so profoundly self-victimizing? It's a really stunning combination. And this isn't just some fringe TikToker, guys. You actually see this idea, this argument that wage labor is akin to slavery, echoed by some of the most prominent intellectuals on the left, the Noam Chomskys of the world. And I've always just found it so absurd, and so obviously it doesn't pass the sniff test. And it's just so directly contradicted by the daily lives and experiences of millions of people in this free country who get to choose what they do for a living, choose where they work, can quit their job, get paid. It's just totally different. And it's always struck me as a really outrageous and ridiculous comparison. But none of that's to say that the plight of the modern day worker isn't hard, isn't tough, or that people aren't struggling to get by. And I acknowledge all of that, but there's many reasons for it. And a lot of them aren't really related to capitalism and are instead often able to be traced back to failures of our government and its interventions and meddling in our system and in our society. So it's not to say everything's perfect and wonderful and miraculous in our modern world for any worker or laborer. Of course not. But much of that is not the fault of capitalism, and none of it is in any way comparable to slavery. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me that this TikTok is as unhinged as it seems to me? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through the depths of stupidity that is this clock app. And now, I'll read a few of your comments from the last episode before we wrap up today's show. One person says, "Thank you for giving me something normal to listen to help me stay calm. My baby is in the hospital, going to be okay, thank goodness, but listening to your show while I'm getting everything together to go back to the hospital for the night is keeping me calm and helping me not forget anything, so thank you." Oh, that is so wonderful, and I'm so glad to be helpful in a small way during a tough time like that. My heart goes out to you. I'm so glad your baby's going to be okay, and I'm just always really humbled by how you guys enjoy my content and the difference it makes in a small way in some of your lives. That's really is what gets me up in the morning and makes me so blessed and so excited to do this. So thank you so much, and God bless. Another person says, "Hey Brad, been subscribed for a few months now and have heard you mention that you aren't religious a few times before. You seem to have a strong moral compass, which is often related toward religion. My question is, where do you get your sense of morality from, and what gives you confidence in your position? Thanks for anything you share." You know, that's a really interesting question and a really tough one to answer succinctly or even answer at all. I guess on one sense, I would say a lot of my sense of morality just traces back to my core principles of the things I believe in, and then I work backwards from there. So whether it's self-reliance or whether it's honesty or integrity, I know I believe in those things, so then I can kind of deduce what I think the moral choice is from there. The question of why I believe in those things is a profound one, and I'm not sure I can give you a good answer on the spot. But what I guess I would say as well is a lot of it just traces back to the idea of the golden rule you live in kindergarten, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. maybe that's in some sense does also trace back to religion, but I think it exists independently of that also as kind of just a position the human mind can deduce. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very good question. And you've given me some food for thought. So maybe I'll have to get into it more in the future after I've had some time to consider that. Another person says, my favorite part of the D'Angelo interview is he didn't even give her a fake name. He was just like, my name is Matt. And she was like, okay, can't be too careful. Yes. I mean, on one sense, I'm not surprised she didn't recognize Matt Walsh because he's an internet famous person, kind of. But if you're in a liberal bubble like someone like hers, you would never know who he is. But even then, just say like, oh, what's her name? I need to be careful. And then just say Matt. And then that's it. It's like, well, clearly you weren't that concerned with being careful then. What was even the point of that, right? If you were just going to proceed after a first name basis, like what? I don't know. I think she just heard $15,000 and was like, I'm in. Another person said, bro, what was that wig Matt was wearing? I about died. Yeah, the wig was really quite something. Got to give him that. Another person says, LOL, extortion, reparations, same difference, I guess. The $30 is just about a bigger insult. It'd probably be better to say no because $30 is insane if she truly believes in reparations. Yeah, here's $30. Oh, that makes up for your ancestors being enslaved and generations of poverty. I don't think so, Robin, especially not when you just got $15K in your pocket. That was the funniest bit to me. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today's podcast. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet on YouTube. Hit that like button before you go. Comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments in every episode and pick a few to respond to. If you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on tomorrow's show. And with that, we'll talk again soon.